Our guest on Etihad Cargo Connections is Jamie Walter, proven thoroughbreds. He is the co-owner and syndicate principal. They've got via English private eye in the Everest. And my question for you, Jamie, is this isn't just your typical horse race. Generally in competitive athletics, it's best, whether you're a two-legged athlete or a four-legged athlete, to play your game, to do your thing, to try to win. Nature's Strip being who Nature's Strip is, do you expect, not just with Private Eye, but the other 10 challengers, to perhaps roll the dice and try some things they wouldn't normally in a typical race because of the importance of this race, the fanfare, and how good Nature's Strip is?
Very good question, AP. What has distinguished Nature's Strip in recent times, for those vaguely familiar with him, he's a big, strong, free-going, very, very fast horse. You've only got to look at his record as evidence of that. And he likes to just get out and roll. However, they have done a great job with him in more recent times, and he's learned to settle. And the distinguishing feature of his first up victory the other day was he was able to take a trail and not over race, which was new territory for the Nature Strip connections. That gives him another string to his bow. Normally, because he's such a big, strong, free-going horse, they like to draw wide with him. So the 12 alley would not be perceived as a disadvantage. However, in a race like this, as you correctly point out, he's got 11 rivals, and they don't want to present the race to him on a platter. And there's a lot of speed in this race. And generally, I find if speed is out wide, and Eduardo, Joe Pride's other runner, is in 9, and he only knows one way as well, and that's to jump and run, or sit right on the speed. With those two speed horses drawn out wide, and the others, there's plenty of fast horses drawn inside as well. I can't see how it won't generate a lot of tempo.
Australia is appropriately as the land of sprinters for thoroughbreds. Do you guys ever get a kick out of that? Because for the rest of the world, just to get to Australia is a multi marathon. It's so exhausting. I guess when you get there, whether you've been there for a little bit of time or for generations, you want to stretch your legs and run, huh?
It's a bloody long plane trip. No doubt about that. And speaking of plane trips, Nature Strip's been all over the world in the last 6 months. He, of course, went to Ascot and triumphed over there. So I guess one question you could pose to the Nature Strip team is, at some point, is he going to require a spell? How long can they keep going without a proper rest? And his runs have been interspersed with little breaks most of the year, but you can't go on forever. And if there's a chink in his armour, maybe that's it. And the 12 alley, as I just suggested earlier, may not be the advantage it normally is for him, because unless he really drives forward, he could be posted wide.
Jamie, you've been at this for a long time, and air travel in general has gotten better, but I'd imagine for shipping equine around the country, the region, and even as you mentioned with Nature's Strip, the world, it's gotten a lot easier. What are some of the considerations that you look at when you ship these majestic animals? And do you have a horror story or two from the past where something went not as planned?
Well, I think equine travel absolutely has become a more refined, generally safer process than it was many years ago. However, it's still quite an exhausting experience, depending on the temperament of the horse. Some horses, just their disposition lend themselves to being able to cope with long distance travel. But we've all heard of the condition travel sickness, which can be fatal for horses. And I think in the case of Nature Strip, he obviously has the right character and disposition to handle long distance travel. But like I say, it takes its toll. And you sometimes find horses that have done a long trip like him, they'll go really well fresh first run because they're on their toes and they're excited to be back in their familiar environment, or indeed in a new environment as he was in Ascot. But after that, the adrenaline drains out and a bit of fatigue might set in, and the desire for a proper rest could manifest itself.
Our guest on the Etihad Cargo Connections is Jamie Walter. He is the co-owner and syndicate principal of Proven Thoroughbreds, and I really enjoyed looking at your website and your core principles. We talked about how communication is paramount. Here I am doing this interview in the Denver airport with some noise issues. The other one that I loved your humility and sense of humor, is everyone buys a dud. And I think that's applicable not just to horse trainers, but we all make decisions. We give it our best and then it comes up empty. But certainly with Private Eye, you didn't buy a dud, but it was a steal of a deal. Can you give us the backstory on $62,500 is a heck of a deal, what you saw on the horse and perhaps others didn't?
Well, let me say right from the outset, AP, when you buy as many horses as I do and as many duds as I've bought, then from time to time, the ducks have all got to be in a row and you've got to get a bit of luck. And we certainly got lucky with Private Eye. Our thinking behind him, he wasn't a standout type. Like, he was a neat horse. I remember my comments in the catalogue was that he had good bone, he had a nice shape, he was correct. He wasn't a particularly fluid mover, which is something that I like to see, actually. But I didn't mind the sire, Al Mahar. He was unfashionable, but he had been a good sire. His mother was by Shamadal, and whilst she was unraced, apparently she was very fast. But more importantly, she'd already thrown a city winner, a small horse by Star Witness. I'm just trying to remember his name. Joe Pride trained him and trained him to several city wins. And Joe had got him second hand and had said to me when we were talking about the possibility of purchasing Private Eye that he wished he'd got hold of the half-brother a little earlier in life, because he was quite a revvy horse who just wanted to get up and go. And with Private Eye, Joe couldn't make the Adelaide sale. I like to buy in tandem with the trainers, AP, because I really like them to have some skin in the purchase, per se, because they're the ones getting out of bed in the middle of the night to train these horses. And if they like them, they're going to bounce out of bed with a greater spring in their step. So it's really important for me for the trainer to like the horse. So I was taking a little bit of a punt because Joe wasn't present in Adelaide, but he was very happy to take him on the back of the fact that he trained the half-brother. But the other factor about Private Eye is from a very good stud, a little stud in the Hunter Valley called Goodwood Farm. Kerry Tibby is the proprietor, and I've had association with Kerry over the years. She's bred some very good horses. Dance Hero, she's bred, as one top-class sprinter many years ago, and numerous others that my memory's not good enough to recall right now. But that's a factor, I think. A good farm that's got a history of producing winners. So those factors all conspired for us to purchase Private Eye. The price, of course, as you mentioned, was pretty attractive too. He was sound of conformation anyway, as much as you can be sure of that. And it was a pretty nice family deeper down. If you look, it's Schnitzel's family.
Jamie Walters, our again from Etihad Cargo Connections. He is the co-owner and the syndicate principal of Proven Thoroughbreds. Sebastian Hutch described Private Eye as having a certain degree of arrogance when he steps on the track. That moxie, that confidence that you like to see in athletes, again, whether they're thoroughbreds or human beings. You've seen a lot of horses. What is it in that regard about Private Eye that perhaps gives him a little pep in his step?
Well, he's an interesting personality, Private Eye, because people I think to fully understand the personality of horses, they've got to accept the premise that you're dealing with, they say, the experts, the mentality of perhaps an 8-year-old child. And we all know 8-year-old children have some personality and character. And with Private Eye, he's a lazy track worker. And I've found over the years with genuine competitors like him, that's a quality, not a disadvantage, because he, as you see in his races, he never pulls. He sensibly conserves all his energy. But when game day occurs, it's all business. And prior to speaking to you this morning, I was talking to one of his owners who resides in Melbourne, who unfortunately can't make it up tomorrow, but he was present last start when Private Eye won the Gilgai, and he said it was really interesting watching him because he was virtually asleep in the tie-up stalls. And then when the saddle went on, different horse. The strapper could barely hold him. He knew what he was there for, and he wanted to get on with the job. And those sort of factors distinguish top-class horses. You know, they know how to compete, and they want to compete.
Jamie, horse racing, of course, is a global cultural phenomenon, but it differs from region to region, continent to continent, and country to country. We think Australia, we mentioned, we think the sprinters, of course, the Everest is coming on very, very strong. We also think, though, about syndicate ownership. It's really taken off down under. Can you talk about its growth in Australia and perhaps you guys setting an example for the rest of the world for people who have a little bit of cash, but they're not millionaires, gajillionaires, to get into the sport of kings?
Well, in Australia, we're very, very fortunate because we have an outstanding funding model where the game increasingly is funded by wagering turnover. Now, I'm sure you've looked at a lot of pedigrees, AP. Australian pedigrees are essentially Irish convict. So we love to gamble and beer swilling, and that is permeated through to our culture now, which clearly involves a hell of a lot more races than just Irish convicts. But that culture of easygoing gambling still exists today because per capita wagering in Australia is enormous, and it's helped racing become a mainstream sport here, as distinct from perhaps in the US where it's more niche, and other parts of the world where it's not as pronounced as a general sport. And that has really helped the wagering and indeed the whole involvement. Having a mainstream sport like racing, people want to be involved. And syndication, since it's been really developed in the last, well, since we started, making it sound as if I'm responsible for it, it's the last 20 years is when it's really kicked off. And people want to be involved, and they can be for not a lot of money. And I thought that syndication would take off in Australia when it became regulated. and we're all licensed, and it has. And the owners of tomorrow in Australia are going to be the major studs and syndicates. And I'm sure you've heard the statistic, 1 in 249 Australians own a share in a racehorse. Staggering, really, when you think about it.
Australian horse racing has come into its own in the last 20, 30, 40 years. Here's one of the big reasons why, folks. Jamie Walter, the co-owner, principal of this occasion for Proven Thoroughbreds. We really appreciate your time. And on behalf of the 1980s, 1990s American pop group, Hall & Oates, with their hit Private Eyes, are watching you. We're going to be watching Private Eye in the Everest and hope that you're holding that trophy soon, sir.
I certainly hope so. Thank you very much, AP.